I'm Sangeeta Waldron, and welcome to Offbeat, which is part of our Legacy Makers podcast. And what we do in Offbeats is really drill down into the conversation that we've had with our guest. So this Offbeat relates to episode 5, where we have spoken to a Palestinian journalist, and her name is Shrouq Al Aila. And I am actually going to now hand over to Giles, my co-host, who will put everything into context of why we invited Shrouq to have a conversation with us. So Giles, take it away.
Okay, so thanks, Sangeeta. So Shrouq, I'm working on a project which is with a media organization highlighting the links between climate change and war. And we're starting off in Gaza, commissioning local journalists in Gaza. And so Shrouq was one of those journalists that we commissioned to do one of the stories. And they're going to be short films. They'll be out soon. And Shrouq did a short film on the agricultural destruction in Gaza from the Israeli bombardment. And just to set the scene, when I contacted Shrouq, I messaged her and said, "Can you do this interview for us?" And she said, "Yes, interested to do it." And I said, "Well, how about sometime next week?" And she messaged back saying, "Can we arrange it closer to the date, because I can't guarantee anything." And living in Gaza, though it doesn't take much to read between those words, you're living minute by minute, day by day, and it's very difficult to make plans. But anyway, it was great to get Shrouq. We had a little bit of a problem with internet connection because the connection cuts out quite often in Gaza. So it was so Shrouq has made this film on the agricultural destruction, and there are researchers who are saying they're saying what has been happening in Gaza is a form of ecocide, and ecocide is this sort of it's been defined as a kind of wanton, unlawful, severe destruction of the environment. And of course, that's to do with nature. I think it's worth saying that the other type of side, genocide, has been raised by many different people. Of course, last year you had the International Court of Justice saying that there was a plausible case for what Israel was doing was genocide. Since then, you've had Amnesty International, Human Rights Watch, you've had United Nations officials saying there's genocide and ethnic cleansing. And then really interestingly, Sangeeta, there's really expert Israeli historians who are professors of genocide studies and Holocaust studies. You have Amos Goldberg, you have Daniel Blattman, you have Raz Siegel. These are all well-established Israeli historians and experts in genocide and Holocaust studies, and they have been saying that what Israel is doing is genocide, constitutes genocide. And just a few days ago, the former Israeli Prime Minister, Ehud Olmert, gave an interview in which he said that, in his opinion, his country, Israel, was committing war crimes. But anyway, that's the context. So Shrouq was doing filming about the destruction of nature, basically. And so that's what we ostensibly were going to interview her about. But of course, the interview went into so many different avenues. And I'm interested, you've had a few days, Sangeeta, to sort of dwell on what she said. What did you think of what Shrouq said?
Yeah, I think we should make the point or just mention that after we spoke to Shrouq, we normally do a wrap up, but we felt it was, well, for both of us, and especially for myself, it was very overwhelming. The conversation was haunting is the word I'd like to use. Um, but there was so much I learnt from Shrouq. And one of the things, and I learnt, which I didn't appreciate till now, is how connected the Palestinian people are to nature,
Mm,
and particularly to trees. And trees are not just something in their garden.
mm,
Trees are almost like an extended family member. And Shrouq told us many beautiful stories of where people have planted trees, or the one man who planted a tree more or less at the same time his son was born, and that was like another child to him. And because of what's going on now in Gaza, people are having to chop trees down for fuel. And that gentleman felt it was like chopping down or cutting down his own child. That really imprinted on me. I didn't appreciate or understand that relationship.
mm.
And that also kind of struck another chord with me, which is indigenous communities have very close relationships with their ecosystem.
Mm.
And I think this is something that we don't appreciate or have understood enough, that this is an indigenous community who are being violated in their own ecosystem. No different to people in the Amazon, where they are, they're losing their dwellings. So that the whole tree connection. And here, if you
Mm.
remember, well, there's been two big tree murders, if we call
Yeah.
them murders. We've
Mm.
had um the the big was it a yew tree
Yes.
in
I think it
Dart,
was
was
you.
it? Yeah,
I don't know where it was, but I remember a very
yeah.
famous old tree. Yeah.
Yes, and then where I live, which is in North London, in Enfield, we had a old one of the oldest oak trees in the country cut down
Yeah.
um, by a corporate, and that issue is still ongoing. People are still protesting. People are still outraged. So if you think of a whole community who are losing their trees, who are have this close connection, um, it is ecocide.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
so that, and I know you and I have been sort of discussing um, this whole relationship with trees. I don't know if you've got anything to add.
Well, yeah, it's good. I fully agree. The Palestinians, I've been to Gaza on a number of different occasions, and I can remember meeting many families who are farmers, and they took me to their strawberry fields, their flower patches, their agricultural fields, the olive trees, the orchards. Shrouq mentioned the citrus fruits, famous for lemons and oranges. And the Palestinians, many of them, yeah, they are people who are salt of the earth. They are farmers, and they are very close to the earth. So I think what you said is very observant, that they are people who are close to their land, and the destruction of their land is for them terrible. And I remember Shrouq on another occasion telling me that, they cry, they have to cut down some of their trees for firewood. They're out of their homes. They've got no means of cooking, keeping warm in the winter, and they would have to cut down the olive trees as if they were, yeah,
Mm,
killing one of their family members. It was
mm,
heartbreaking for them.
mm.
Now, you said at the end something really touching, poignant, and you said you felt that you couldn't say thank you to Shrouq, and you said sorry.
Mm.
I thought that was a very, yeah, I thought it was a very poignant moment and very compassionate and humane. What were you feeling then?
Well, while we had that conversation with Shrouq, we also had some conversations that were not recorded for the podcast. And I could relate as just as woman to woman and mother to mother. And Shrouq told us this story. That story keeps going over in my head, which is she has an 18-month-old daughter who Shrouq has lost her husband. He was one of the first casualties when this war started. And so their daughter is now 18 months, and Shrouq cannot afford the nappies because they're so expensive. So what she is trying to do is potty train her daughter. And ordinarily that would sound okay, quite simple, but to buy the clothes for her daughter, she has to first create money because there are no banks. Banks have closed for a year. So she has to go somewhere to get some money. Then, now she's got some cash, she's got to put some petrol into the car. And the diesel, she was saying, is like $100 a gallon.
Yeah, it was like
Yeah.
yeah, for petrol, $100 a liter.
A litre,
Um,
sorry. Yeah. So I don't know what a gallon is, but anyway, I don't try. But anyway, it's $100.
yeah.
She had to fill up that car. Then because people now know you've got petrol, you're driving, that you must have cash. And because people are desperate, you're suddenly a target. And then you go to the market, but she said the markets aren't what we think they are anymore. People are selling the basics. Like people are just so desperate. But anyway, she's trying to find these clothes for her daughter, and this market was bombed the other day, and she has been in and out of that market all this time. So I found that story. It's not it's a mission. Do you know, it's a mission impossible, that she has to go out. She has to mentally prepare herself to go and get these clothes, first of all. And then also the other thing she said is that she has uploaded all the photos of herself and her husband and sent it to family outside of Gaza, because if anything happened to her, she wanted her daughter to have some kind of memory. So, and and I just felt, what are we doing? We are, as humans, we are destroying our own species.
Mm,
Um,
mm,
so I found that it was overwhelming, and we could hear the exhaustion in Shrouq's voice, the the desperation, the anxiety. Uh,
mm.
yeah. So,
Yeah, she mentioned, the story of her visiting or trying to visit her husband's grave, and how the cemetery was in the red zone, very difficult, dangerous area, couldn't always go there, and the fear that they might just dig up, bulldoze the cemetery. She made the expression, they're even killing the dead people.
yeah.
Um, so it was, yeah, it was. In fact, you mentioned her husband, and obviously you mentioned I think he was killed in the Israeli bombardment quite early on. I think it
Mm,
was in the first month or two of the war. And I think it's worth mentioning, so many journalists have been killed. So there's the Committee to Protect Journalists, which is a New York-based non-profit organization, independent, credible organization. And I think at the last count, as of a few days ago, something like 180 journalists have been killed in the war. I think, let's have a look at the figures here. Yeah, 172 of the Palestinians, 2 Israelis, and 6 Lebanese. This is since October the 7th, 2023. And the Committee to Protect Journalists has determined that at least 17 journalists were directly targeted by Israeli forces in killings which the CPJ, the Committee to Protect Journalists, classifies as murders. So, and Shrouq mentioned not just her husband, but the brother of her husband, who was actually working on the project about climate change and war, was killed just recently. And you know, a few years ago, I wrote an article on how media freedom is actually a climate solution. If journalists are being censored and stopped, and if offices are being bombed and journalists are being killed, we don't know what's happening in the world. And that's, you know, for the climate story as well. We need to know what's happening in the world, and journalists are the storytellers of what's happening in the world, whether it's war, well, whatever it is, climate
Mm.
change. We need, so media freedom is a climate solution.
That's a really interesting point. I don't, yeah. What else would you say about that? That's a really interesting
Well,
statement.
you know, there had been, last year I was at a United Nations conference, and it was the press, a free press and the planet. And it was about the idea that climate journalists, environmental journalists are being targeted, sometimes killed in certain countries. There's the famous case in Brazil of Dom Phillips, the British
Yeah.
journalist, and his Brazilian colleague who were killed when they were reporting from the Amazon. Because climate journalists are telling stories and doing investigations and uncovering nefarious acts which are supported either by criminal organizations or by gangs, or even by, you know, ending up with companies and corporations that don't want certain truths to be told. So it's a problem, and I think it's a growing problem uh, that the media is increasingly being attacked.
Just on that, I I know that climate journalists now, they're wherever they go and report, it's very similar to being a war reporter because of the areas they're going into sometimes are very volatile, not safe, such as the LA fires, or they are going into areas that I've used that word nefarious this week a couple of times, that there are nefarious players, um, and they're out to get you. That's as simple
Yeah,
as that.
yeah,
They don't want the story out.
yeah.
Uh, yeah, so you're right.
And slightly going on to another topic related to that is and Shrouq mentioned it, the idea of foreign media getting access, independent access into Gaza. Of course, they're not being allowed by the Israeli authorities. And I think it's crucial that foreign media get access into Gaza. However, having said that, we can't ignore the fact that there are very brave, professional Palestinian journalists on the ground who have been telling this story from day one, and we have to recognize that they are the sacrifices they are making, you know, is tremendous. And hats off to those journalists on the ground, the Palestinian journalists who have been telling this story from day one.
Mm. There's also that whole sort of conversation about war and climate and reporting, isn't there? That
Yeah.
now, since the Second World War, we have more places in conflict than at any other time.
So yeah, I mean, here's the $64 million question is can we achieve net zero? Can we achieve sustainable future if we are continuing to make war? If mankind, and I underline that word mankind, is continuing to make war. And a few months ago, there was a report, and I've got it here, it's the Conflict Intensity Index published by risk analysts, Verisk Maplecroft, and it was published in late 2024. And basically, they said that global conflict is increasing. They measure the amount of land in which there is conflict, and they came up with the conclusion that conflict affected areas have grown 65% since 2021. And they said that that amount of area that is now conflict affected since 2021 is nearly twice the size of India. So since 2021, an area nearly twice the size of India has conflict has taken over there.
There's two things I've got that just when you said that. One, that is India is a subcontinent, right? So if you've never been to India, just imagine it's a subcontinent. Secondly, what the hell has happened to us? 2021, 2020, we're in a pandemic. So we've come out of this pandemic wanting to fight, wanting to kill each other. That is what I'm thinking. What has happened to us as humanity that we've come out and this is where we're at?
Yeah, it's shocking. I mean, now war's raging. You've got Ukraine, Gaza, other
Sudan.
areas. The occupied West Bank is tensions there. You had Lebanon, Sudan, Myanmar. The Democratic Republic of Congo. I mean, the list goes on of areas that are witnessing conflict. And yeah, what hope is there? I guess without being too negative, the solution then is peace. And if we're gonna find solutions to the climate crisis, we need to resolve these wars and establish peace.
Yeah. So on that, and it's probably where we're drawing up now anyway, but as you know, I'm ever the optimist.
Yep.
And I've been looking at how can we still make, well, can we affect change in Gaza? And yes, we can. There are things we can do. So I just wanted to kind of sort of highlight some of the things we can do. We can contact our politicians, write to your local MP, sign petitions. There are lots of petitions that are being run by different not-for-profits, different organizations like Oxfam, Amnesty International. They're all out there. Google is your friend. Raise awareness about the issue on social media. Talk about it with your friends and family, because when I spoke to Shrouq, I was educated. I understood about the relationship Palestinians have with their land. So the more we educate ourselves, the more informed we are, the better choices and decisions we can make. So I think that's really important. And just very recently, over 400 writers and authors signed a letter asking our government, the UK government, to somehow stop this war, put pressure to stop this war. And that these were, big names from the literary world: Sadie Smith, Ian McEwan, Russell T Davies. So there is momentum there, and that people want collectively to stop this. And I I always say, we are more powerful together. So there are things we can do.
Yeah. Yep. I think that's a good note to end on. What do you think, Sangeeta?
Yeah. I've I've shut you down into silence, but
Yeah,
yeah.
I mean, I fully agree. I mean, and I think what you were saying about learning, yeah, learning. I'm learning about the situation.
We're never
All the
too old.
information is out there. All the information is out there.
Yeah.
It's just about finding it.
Yeah. And you're never too old. You're never too old to learn.
Yeah.
Mm. Okay, on that note, we shall say au revoir.
All right.
All
Well,
right.
good to talk. And
All
and
right.
so, by the way, just to remind our listeners and viewers, this episode we're doing now relates to our interview that we did earlier with Shrouq Al Aila, and that's I believe it's episode 5, isn't it? So
That's right.
if you want to listen to the full interview that we did with Shrouq, that will be go back one episode. That's episode 5.
Yeah. All right.
All right. Okay,
All right.
Sangeeta. Bye
Bye.
bye.